got a lot to cover in this review. I think I've written about 4 pages worth of notes. So that being said, I think I should be brief as I can, but simultaneously at the same time, make sure give this episode the review it deserves and do it justice. So I just wanted to mention that, to my surprise, I only found out today, because I like to do some research before I review certain episodes, and I like to watch them just before I do review them, that this is written by Mark Gatiss. For those who are unaware, basically Mark Gatiss is the one who plays Mycroft Holmes in all the way over to the Sherlock series. And what I've noticed that it's quite funny to a certain extent, because as I was watching this episode after I discovered that this was written by Mark Gatiss, it's got his style written all over this episode. So the fact that I didn't realise it to today is quite amazing, but it just shows how it doesn't matter how much you know about a TV show, there are certain things that can still surprise you. What basically the point I'm trying to make is, Mark Gatiss, I have noticed his style of writing. He seems to be really good at writing period dramas. And basically what I also wanted to bring up is that I feel that Doctor Who has a very rare ability into mixing fiction with either historical events or people. And even today, not many TV shows has that capability of doing that, can really have that ability to do that, and I think that's one of the many appealing qualities that Doctor Who does have. What I also wanted to, after the ambulance has gone past, what I also wanted to mention as well is I feel this is very much a character piece. As opposed to last week's episode I reviewed was very much visual effects. I felt this fleshed out the characters significantly more. However, that being said, I do feel the visual effects for the Gelf was quite phenomenal. So that's pretty much the background info that I wanted to bring up, other than the fact that Eve Miles was obviously in this episode, and she played a character called Gwyneth. And for those who are in the know, she obviously plays another certain character in another certain TV show in the Doctor Who universe. I will obviously bring it up when I get to that point. What I enjoyed about this episode as well is I really enjoyed the attention-grabbing opener. Before it went on to the opening sequence, I thought that you really do get the impression that they are trying to grab certain viewers' attention who might not have been at that particular moment in time, might not have been watching Doctor Who week in, week out quite religiously. And whoever's, like I've previously said on numerous occasions, I genuinely entice anyone to watch the episode before they come to these reviews and just watch that opening sequence, because I thought it was pretty spot on, to say the least. Now, even though I mentioned that I felt Billie Piper got her acting chops out significantly in last episode, even though this isn't really an episode about Rose Tyler, it's not around her as it has been the last 2 episodes, I do feel that Billie Piper still on occasion in this piece there are some golden moments in where she yet again doesn't disappoint the viewer in terms of getting her acting chops out, and I'll keep using that euphemism. And what I noticed is a particular one of the opening scenes with the Doctor, and Billie Piper. What I've noticed, and I didn't actually notice before. It's only come to my attention as I've been reviewing these episodes, is her attention to facial expressions. She's very much an expressive actress, or that I've noticed anyway. In her facial expression lets the audience know what she's feeling, and I think she does this remarkably. And one of the little reasons why I felt at the time Billie Piper was quite an underrated actress, because the particular scene I'm referencing is when they get to 1860, I believe the year was, and it's almost as if she realizes that this is an amazing lifestyle. You know, the fact that I didn't write her quote down, but the fact, I think it goes along the lines of, you can see days 100,000 sunsets ago, and you can see in her eyes she's just coming to this realization. This is an amazing lifestyle to have with the Doctor. Very good acting on her behalf. I think it should be noted, there's a lot of firsts for this episode, in terms of, this is the first mention of the rift under Cardiff. This is the first time we see the TARDIS malfunctioning, especially since the series has been revived. But let's get to that later. What I want to talk about first is the TARDIS first malfunction. Basically, I think there was originally, from an in-character perspective, it was originally meant to be in 1860 London, but they just happened to arrive in Cardiff. I thought that was pretty smart, and to be fair, quite funny, considering from an outside character perspective, obviously they do most, well, if not all, filming of Doctor Who in Cardiff. So I thought that was quite clever. One thing that I have noted, that this is the first time that the rift under Cardiff is mentioned in this episode, and it's only when you look back on that we know the significance of that will have. Other shows in another certain show in the Who universe will use that mostly as a plot point, but it's only when we realise, after we look back on certain episodes, that we realise the significance of this rift that's under Cardiff. What I also wanted to bring up as well is what I also noted quite significantly is Charles Dickens' scepticism. I thought this episode was, even though it wasn't about Charles Dickens. The main plot was circulating about an alien race that was trying to leave their planet, which I will get to in a moment, but going to another planet that's from the other side of the universe and getting to Earth using this rift under Cardiff. That was the main plot. But I think it should mention that I felt this maintained a great balance of keeping the story going and giving you a good psyche of what Charles Dickens could have been. Now, there's a certain scene he has with the Doctor, in terms of that all this is happening around Charles Dickens, and he still remains really sceptic. And for some reason or another, it seemed to upset the Doctor, and the Doctor does snap at Charles Dickens. Now, sadly, I don't know the actor. I haven't seen much of his works, him who portrays Charles Dickens in this piece. However, it should mention that whoever he is a phenomenal actor. I think he portrayed Charles Dickens and got the part spot on. And Christopher Eccleston in this particular scene is Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor. What more do you need to say about that? It makes an intriguing scene, because although Charles Dickens' scepticism seemed to annoy the Doctor and the Doctor did snap, he was extremely apologetic afterwards. And I find it quite interesting that this is the actor who played Charles Dickens. He portrayed this man that, even though he's written great fiction from obviously an in-character and in real life, it's Charles Dickens. I found it really interesting that this is a man who's written great fiction, but he almost breaks down when he realises these things, these ghosts that he has written about himself. When he realises that these things are actually occurring around him, he almost breaks down. And I just find that interesting. A man who is so keen to write about things, when he realises that this could be happening in reality, he completely shuts down. And I felt it was very human. One of the many things that I liked about this particular portrayal of Charles Dickens is, I didn't actually write about this, but it actually came to me just not long before I'm doing this particular review. There's one scene that actually does make me think as a reviewer, and it portrays this person that, even though he's widely celebrated in the real world, there's a scene when he's in the I'm going to say drawing room, but he's basically when he's by himself. I want to use the word VIP lounge, but there's another word for it. But when he's by himself, I liked how the scene showed a very vulnerable side to him. And I thought that was very human. So I think it gave you a very an extra gritty layer upon this particular episode. Let's talk about Rosie's certain conversation with Gwyneth. I like how they brung the social attitude. And obviously Rose comes from a completely different circumstance than Gwyneth. I also like how they brung the social attitudes, and they writ it like they discussed it with one another. Not necessarily clashing, but I think I love how Rose realised how different the Dickensian, if that's even a proper word, the Dickensian era truly was. And there's a certain statement I think Gwyneth says, and she says, "Oh, I get paid £7 a week." And actually, I did a little bit of research for this particular review, and getting paid £7 a week, especially in those days, as a maiden, as a servant, for lack of a better word, is actually a lot of money. So I love how they brung an extra layer upon that particular scene where Rose says, "How much?" As if to say, "Oh, that is a disgusting amount." But she says, I know. I would have wanted to. I'd been happy with £6 a week." I love that. I just think it's. Yeah, I just think it brought an added dimension into the scene. So I enjoy that. Very realistic. I like how they brung the girl in the way that they did, and they explained to the audience, if not for anybody else, that there was more. They were just another bunch of victims of the Time War. Now, that being said, now I'm not justifying what they do in this particular episode, but I've got a theory. Now, please correct me in the comment status. It is an incredible shame that the Gelth aren't more explored in the Doctor Who universe. Now, I don't think this is a spoiler saying to you, anybody who's watching this, that the Gelth aren't, except for this episode, I think they get a reference later on once, they get mentioned once, but they are never seen again. And I feel that's an awful shame, because I felt there was a certain mystique about the Gelth that could have been explored in a later episode, and it still might happen. Who's to say it won't? But I have the point I'm trying to make here is my theory is in towards the Gelth that they're not necessarily villains as your regular what Doctor Who does in leaps and bounds. You tend to have a monster of the week. I was under the impression as I was watching this episode that what they were doing was just an act of clear desperation because of the Time War. They had lost their home. Now, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. What they did was very cruel, and the fact that what they were doing was selfish. They were willing to murder a world of people just to satisfy their own needs. And the way that the episode did it, it gave you the impression that these are actually evil people. But personally speaking, I wouldn't have done it like that. So yeah, I felt that's all I've needed to say. Great visual effects for the Gelth, and like I've just previously stated, that I'm just in some ways quite disappointed that they haven't as of yet really been explored again. Again, more interesting scenes. I also enjoyed the scene where it seemed that Rosie's morals seemed to clash with the Doctor, and I enjoy that sort of character stuff. Again, strictly speaking, from the perspective of a student of writing, I like scenes where two characters, especially in this particular scene, the one I'm talking about with Rose and the Doctor, because Rose is sickened almost by the idea that the Doctor's going along, that the Gelth are willing to use human corpses as vessels, and that horrifies Rose, understandably so, but at the same time, you can understand where the Doctor's coming from. And the point I'm trying to make is, I love these sort of scenes. This is what Doctor Who does at its best. It gives you a problem, but also simultaneously says to the audience, there is no right and wrong answer. There is no... If you produce a solution in your mind, that's not saying it's the right answer, but it's not necessarily saying it's the wrong answer. It's leaving the audience to decide the solution. It's letting them decide for themselves what is right and what's wrong. And unfortunately, Doctor Who very rarely does this without saying too much. And it's such a shame, because this is Doctor Who, personally speaking, at its finest. And admittedly, I did enjoy this episode a lot more than I anticipated. Towards the end, there's a quote that Charles Dickens says after the Gelth have gone because of Gwyneth's sacrifice, and I'll read out this quote. I had to write it down because I think it's a brilliant quote, and I'll share with you my interpretation of it. There are more things in heaven and earth that are not in any philosophy, even for you, Doctor. And obviously he was speaking to the Doctor. And the way I think that, however people decide to interpret that, I still genuinely feel that's a great quotation. However, that being said, how I interpreted it is basically you could add on to how you see things in real life. And basically, like I've just said, how I interpreted it is a case of, no matter how much you know in life, or how much you've learnt, and how much wisdom you may or may not have, no matter how advanced you may feel you are, that doesn't mean you know everything. There are still things out there that still cannot be explained. And I love that. I eat that sort of... Doctor Who is overwhelmingly known for his great quotations, and I think that's one of them. Now it's time for me to read out my review and give it a rating. So this is what I put. Doctor Who the Unquiet Dead, I think I pronounced that correctly, was a great balance of light comedy and having a dark theme, with a great take on Charles Dickens and a brilliant story to go along with it. Having enjoyed the episode than I previously anticipated, I'm having to give Doctor Who the Unquiet Dead a 9 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed this review, and as always, Dancing Bear out.